It begins with a question, whispered in the aftermath of an impossible scene. Why do the vast majority of these strange incidents involve solitary victims, found alone in the quiet of their homes? Why do the few witness accounts that exist describe a sudden, inexplicable flash of light, followed by an unnerving silence? And why, when faced with a body consumed by fire while the room remains almost untouched, did investigators turn not to folklore, but to a chillingly plausible scientific explanation? Spontaneous human combustion, or SHC, is a term that conjures images of science fiction and horror. Yet, the phenomenon it describes is catalogued in hundreds of official reports. The classic hallmarks are eerily consistent. A human body is incinerated, often reduced to ash, while its immediate surroundings, a chair, a bed, even the newspaper on a nearby table, suffer little to no damage. The only other telltale sign is often a strange, greasy residue coating the walls and ceiling. This isn't a typical house fire. In a normal blaze, the entire room would be engulfed, reaching temperatures over 1500 degrees Fahrenheit to cause such destruction to a body. But in these cases, the heat seems intensely localized, focused with an almost surgical precision that defies conventional understanding of fire. Investigators are left with a scene that breaks the rules, forcing them to ask, what kind of fire consumes a person but not the paper they were reading? The trail of these bizarre events stretches back centuries. One of the earliest documented cases comes from 1731 Italy, involving Countess Cornelia Zangheri-Bandi. She was found in her bedroom as a pile of ash, with only her lower legs remaining. Her room was coated in a foul-smelling soot, but was otherwise undamaged. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, similar stories emerged from across Europe, often sensationalized in literature and moralizing pamphlets, which frequently blame the victim's consumption of alcohol. By the 20th century, the phenomenon moved from folklore to formal investigation. The 1951 case of Mary Reeser in St. Petersburg, Florida, became a touchstone for modern inquiry. Found as a pile of ashes in her armchair, with only a slippered foot remaining, her case baffled police and the FBI. The official report noted the extreme heat needed to cremate a body, yet the apartment showed minimal fire damage. This paradox pushed investigators toward more scientific theories. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, forensic science began to provide a framework. Controlled laboratory experiments, often using animal carcasses to simulate the human body, started to reveal a mechanism that was not spontaneous, but was just as unsettling. As investigators compiled data from these incidents, distinct patterns began to emerge. The victims were not random. A significant majority were older adults, often with mobility issues that would make it difficult to react to a fire or escape. They were almost always alone at the time of death, meaning there was no one to intervene. Several environmental and behavioral factors also appeared with striking regularity. The presence of an external ignition source, like a lit cigarette, was common. Many victims were known smokers. Alcohol consumption was another recurring theme, not as a direct cause of combustion, but as a factor that could lead to deep sleep or incapacitation, rendering a person unable to respond to being burned. The type of clothing worn also seemed to play a role, with synthetic fabrics being noted in some cases. These correlations paint a tragic picture, not of a random mystical event, but of a perfect storm of vulnerability, isolation, and a small unnoticed accident. This convergence of factors led forensic scientists to the leading explanation for these so-called spontaneous combustions, the wick effect. It's a simple yet grim process. It begins with an external ignition source, a dropped cigarette, a spark from faulty wiring, or an ember from a fireplace. This small flame ignites the victim's clothing. Here is the critical step. As the initial fire burns, it begins to heat the subcutaneous body fat beneath the skin. The fat liquefies and is absorbed by the charred clothing, which then acts like the wick of a candle. The human body contains a significant amount of fat, a potent fuel source. Once saturated, the clothing wick allows this liquefied fat to burn at a low temperature over a very long period, sometimes for hours. This isn't a sudden, explosive fire. It's a slow, smoldering process. like a candle burning down. This explains the most baffling aspects of the scene. The fire is contained to its fuel source, the body, and doesn't have enough open flame to ignite the rest of the room. It generates intense heat in a very localized area, sufficient to destroy bone and tissue, while leaving a nearby stack of magazines untouched. The process also produces a great deal of oily smoke, which accounts for the greasy soot found on the walls and ceiling. While the wick effect is the most widely accepted scientific explanation, it hasn't silenced all debate. Over the years, alternative hypotheses have been proposed, though most lack substantial evidence. Some have speculated about a buildup of methane gas in the intestines, ignited by enzymatic processes. However, the quantity of methane required and a viable internal ignition source make this highly improbable. Others have pointed to exotic theories involving static electricity, or even hypothetical biochemical reactions that could cause a body to self-ignite. The problem with these theories is that they are not reproducible and have never been observed. They exist primarily to explain the spontaneous aspect of the name, which science now suggests is a misnomer. The scientific consensus, grounded in forensic evidence and repeatable lab experiments, firmly supports the wick effect. It doesn't require rewriting the laws of physics or chemistry. It only requires a tragic and specific set of circumstances: a source of fuel, a wick, and an external flame. The mystery isn't about how a person can spontaneously explode. It's about how a small, accidental fire can become so devastatingly focused. To understand how these factors align, consider these anonymized case composites. First, an elderly man, a heavy smoker, falls asleep in his favorite armchair. A lit cigarette drops from his hand, igniting the upholstery and his clothing. Incapacitated by sleep and poor health, he is unaware of the slow, smoldering fire. Hours later, he is discovered, the fire having consumed him via the wick effect, leaving the chair charred but the rest of the room intact. The coroner's report lists the cause of death as smoke inhalation and burns from an accidental fire. Second, an individual with severely limited mobility relies on a portable space heater for warmth. Placed too close to their chair, the heater ignites their synthetic fiber blanket. The material melts and fuses to their clothing, creating a perfect wick. The slow burn begins. In this scenario, a functioning smoke alarm could provide a life-saving alert, but without it, the outcome is often fatal. Finally, a person, heavily impaired by alcohol, passes out on their sofa while wearing polyester clothing. A nearby candle is knocked over. The flammable clothing ignites instantly. The victim, in a deep alcohol-induced stupor, never wakes up. The fire consumes the body's fat as fuel, and when discovered, the scene is classic SHC. A body reduced to ash with minimal damage to the apartment. In each case, the official conclusion is not supernatural, but a tragic, preventable accident. The public health and safety outcomes from studying these events are clear. Fire marshals and insurance investigators, armed with an understanding of the wick effect, can now accurately reconstruct these scenes, closing cases that might have once remained open-ended mysteries. Their findings consistently point away from the paranormal and toward mundane fire safety failures. This shift in understanding has critical life-saving implications. It underscores the importance of smoke alarms, especially for those living alone. It highlights the dangers of smoking in bed or when drowsy, and it reinforces the need for home safety checks for vulnerable populations, ensuring heaters are kept at a safe distance and flammable materials are properly managed. It's also crucial to approach this topic with respect for the victims. These are not campfire stories. They are human tragedies. Sensationalism obscures the real lesson, that with awareness and precaution, these devastating events can be prevented. The science behind spontaneous human combustion reveals that the greatest dangers are often the ones we overlook. Staying safe is a matter of practical steps. Never smoke in bed or when you feel sleepy. Keep flammable items like papers, blankets, and aerosol cans far away from heat sources. Ensure all heaters have at least 3 feet of clearance around them. Get regular medical checkups to manage your health, especially conditions that might limit mobility or awareness. And most importantly, install and regularly test smoke alarms in your home. The truth behind this mystery is not a monster hiding in the shadows, but a reminder of our own fragility and the simple physics of fire. If you're curious to uncover the science behind more strange but true mysteries, hit follow. There's always more to investigate.